Hello guys and gals, me Mutahar, and what if I told you Reddit actually did something good? What if I told you Reddit just exposed a pretty big grift, a pretty big scam if you will? Now look, I know that I've been talking a fair bit about that whole AI stuff, but ladies and gentlemen, let's start small here, okay? How do you get one of these chatbots, how do you get one of these LLMs to think the way that they do, okay? How do you get them to understand the world? Well, you feed them data. Now, for instance, you can feed them all kinds of data, okay? You can grab the 4chan extensive poll database with hundreds of thousands of rows. Now, this database, as you can imagine, is pretty naughty. It's got some pretty bad things going on, okay? It's got some pretty dirty language being thrown. But a whole bunch of people downloaded this information, put it into a bunch of cells, and those cells can then be fed into training models. They can be tokenized. They can be used to create small little language models that you can run locally and you can talk to. In some cases, there have been YouTubers that have used this actual data set, made a 4chan chatbot or LLM, and actually used it on the 4chan website, where it actually kind of sat there for, I believe, an entire day, writing some of the most racist, abhorrent, filthy shit, and nobody was really the wiser. So obviously there are risks with this data set. For instance, the potential for offensive content. Yeah, no shit, bro. It's the fucking poll database. What do you expect? But anyways, ladies and gentlemen, obviously, you know, real LLMs that people use on a day-to-day basis, like ChatGPT or whatever the hell you want to use, need all the data they can imagine, okay? Every single bit of data from human beings. And to do that, they have to scrape the internet. Now, in a lot of cases, Reddit is one of the biggest sources for information on the internet. And in some cases, they've actually made deals with Google to the tune of $60 million. Around 2 years ago, I talked about it, where they would basically license out your user-generated content, because let's be goddamn honest here, 100% of Reddit is, from what I understand, user-generated content, okay? It's just people writing posts and a whole bunch of moderators having a whole power trip for a whole $0 a year salary, okay? But anyways, Reddit decides, okay, we're just gonna license out this information to places like Google, because let's be honest here, when we use Google, we type in our entire like search term, and then we do space Reddit, because generally speaking, the humans on Reddit probably give better answers than the dog shit search results of Google on a day-to-day basis. So anyways, Reddit makes a bunch of money doing this, and I think they want to make like $20 billion doing this shit. Well, what about people who are like, fuck Reddit, I'm gonna not pay for it, I'm gonna get this information for free? Well, Reddit doesn't take too kindly to that, and they basically concocted a pretty impressive, I guess you could say, a sting operation, and it actually worked. So anyways, this is a 54-page lawsuit between Reddit and 3 companies. So SERP API, Oxy Labs, AWM Proxy, well actually 4 companies, and Perplexity AI. You know the guys who made the Comet browser? Yeah, all these companies are just fucking suing each other. So let's actually read this and talk about what's going on. So Reddit brings this action to stop the industrial scale unlawful circumvention of data protections by a group of bad actors who will stop at nothing to get their hands on valuable, and it is valuable, copyrighted content on Reddit. So again, it's your user-generated shit that Reddit wants to keep safe. Remember, Reddit doesn't give a fuck about you, okay? They don't give a fuck about the user. What they give a fuck about is using the information you post and selling that on their terms to Google or whatever fucking organization they want, okay? They do not care about you. I'm not here to pitch Reddit as this altruistic good guy. Really, they're trying to keep their nuts safe. That's what's going on. So they mentioned these 3 companies, Oxy Labs, AWM, and SERP API, which again, they say it's a Lithuanian data scraper as Oxy Labs is. AWM is a former Russian botnet. What the fuck? And then SERP API is this Texas company that publicly advertises its shady circumvention tactics. So to show you what SERP API is, you can actually purchase this for yourself. And you know when I showed you a local LLM that I had, instead of using like SeerXNG, like your local like search engine, you can purchase access to SERP API and have it scrape information for you. So for instance, I looked up Halo Remake and it looked up, so this is what the page looks like to you. Now what SERP API does is it grabs information about everything that you're seeing. And LLMs will take this information and use it to, feedback information to the user, right? So the allegation here is not that they're opening up Reddit, for instance, right? It's the fact that the search engines, for instance, SERP API, will do the same thing that I talked about, where, again, you type in Halo Remake and Reddit. Now, of course, obviously, what they look for over here is mostly the snippet sections, right? Or for instance, they want to look at, again, just people talking about this, whatever they can scrape from Google SERP or Google's API, instead of directly going into Reddit. And sometimes, if you're looking at Reddit over here, you might get the answer through like the Gemini prompt up top, or you might just get the answer in this little section. And that is one of the things that was being scraped. And of course, other companies like Oxy Labs will kind of do this. SERP API, for instance, wouldn't even be something that Google would approve of in their terms and conditions. But that's the grit. These companies scrape the internet and basically package it in a nice way for all these AI companies and just other people in general, right? Like that's the whole operation. When it came to AWM proxy, for instance, where they alleged that it was this apparent actual Russian botnet, that was more specifically related to the Gloop Tiba botnet, which this is all the way back in 2021, 2022. But basically at one point in December 2021, Google was suing 2 Russians that were apparently alleged to be behind this botnet. And literally the same day, AWM Proxy, which was 14 years old and apparently rented hacked PCs to cybercriminals, also went offline. And it was also the understanding from many people in the security game that Gloop Tiba and AWM Proxy was kind of one and the same. So what was really the scam over here and why were proxies used? So basically, the allegation is first they were evading Reddit's own anti-scraping measures, and second, they were circumventing Google's controls and scraping the Reddit content directly from Google's search results. So in a very real sense, these defendants are similar to would-be bank robbers who, knowing they cannot get into the bank vault, break into the armored truck carrying the cash instead. Bro, they made it sound like the beginning of fucking Heat, bro. When they're goddamn hitting the armored van and shit. I cannot, dude. Man, some days I wish I could be a judge reading this shit. I would lose my mind in a courtroom, dude. So anyways, defendant Perplexity AI, an AI company that is more akin to a North Korean hacker, is a willing customer of at least one of its co-defendants and will apparently do anything to get the Reddit data it desperately needs to fuel its answer engine. So again, that is basically anything other than paying Reddit directly, because why the fuck would they? Why would you pay a company $60 million if you could just get it for fucking free, or get it at a much discounted rate, right? Which is obviously what Perplexity would allegedly want to do, okay? I'm not saying that these are all allegations, but again, remember, these companies scrape information everywhere. If they started paying for the training data, I mean, bro, they would go under easily, okay? Could you imagine how in the red financially would you be if you actually had to pay people to use their information and build these LLMs? I mean, could you imagine the fund that would go towards people that are artists, people who are having their shit scraped, people who are actually putting this stuff together? I mean, it would be crazy. So basically, the allegation too was that SERP API, Oxy Labs, and AWM Proxy would just scrape the data from Google. And the way that they would scrape the data is they would mask their identities, hide their locations, basically acting as proxies. It would just be like VPNs, right? They would mask themselves, send every request, and make it look like a real human being was sending the request. So you wouldn't trip Google's CAPTCHAs, Google's anti-scraping. This was a pretty interesting operation. And they said basically in the span of 2 weeks, without authorization, 3 billion search page results containing Reddit texts, URLs, images, and videos were basically grabbed. That's insane. So now what's interesting about it too is that apparently Reddit had caught Perplexity red-handed, actually, and this is where it gets super duper interesting. So they used the bank robbery analogy and said that Reddit placed a marked bill, and apparently Perplexity just grabbed it. So down over here at page 2741 here, they were saying Perplexity or its agents are working with one or more of SERP API yada 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 to circumvent the technological measures protecting Reddit content and scraping the information. So to confirm the hypothesis, Reddit made this test post. The equivalent of a digital marked bill that could only be fucking... Basically, Perplexity popped the die pack, okay? The die pack went off. That could only be crawled by Google's search engine and was not otherwise accessible anywhere on the internet, okay? So again, they made this post that I guess you couldn't access via Reddit. You could only access it if you were looking through Google search engine, okay? So within hours, queries to Perplexity's answer engines produced the contents of that test post. The only way that Perplexity could have obtained that Reddit content and then used it in its answer engine is if it and or its co-defendants scraped Google SERPs for the Reddit content, and Perplexity then quickly threw that data into its answer engine, okay? Now, if you want to see that post for yourself, you probably could, according to Reddit, dig up through SERP API and a lot of these like organizations and probably find it yourself. But it shows you that, with the volume of searches, they're just constantly hitting Reddit to grab everything that they can, obviously, in their allegation to feed into their AI model. So it's insane too, because they kind of say that the practices led Cloudflare CEO to say that Perplexity's practices better resemble North Korean hackers than the practices of a reputable AI company, bro. Jesus Christ. I mean, there's some pretty inflammatory language over here, and honestly, I'm having so much fun reading it, and it's just funny to see like all these big tech companies who really don't give a shit about your privacy, my privacy, or really even our safety, get into these fights with each other and use these languages to like make it look like they're morally above the other. You know what I mean? Reddit doesn't give a shit about your information. They only give a shit if they can monetize your information in their own AI or with their actual official dealings. Now, ultimately, how the fuck does Perplexity respond to this? Well, not just through a lawyer, I imagine. No, they actually went right on Reddit. And they posted here too. So right here they say, "Dear Redditors, you might read that Perplexity was named in a lawsuit filed by Reddit this morning. We know companies usually dodge questions during lawsuits, but we'd rather be upfront. Perplexity believes this is a sad example of what happens when public data becomes a big part of public companies' business models. Selling access to training data is an increasingly important revenue stream for Reddit, especially now that model makers are cutting back on deals with Reddit or walking away completely. Why sue Perplexity? Our guess, it's about a show of force in Reddit's training data negotiations with Google and OpenAI. Perplexity doesn't train foundation models. Here's where we push back. Reddit told the press we ignored them when we asked about licensing. Untrue. Whenever anyone asks us about content licensing, we explain that Perplexity, as an application layer company, does not train AI models on content. Never has. So it's impossible for us to sign a license agreement to do so. A year ago, after explaining this, Reddit insisted we pay anyways, despite lawfully accessing Reddit data. Bowing to strong-arm tactics just isn't how we do business. What does Perplexity actually do with Reddit content? We summarize Reddit discussions and we cite Reddit threads in answers. Just like people share links to posts here all the time. Perplexity invented citations in AI for two reasons. So that you can verify the accuracy of AI answers, and so you can follow the citation to learn more about and expand the journey of curiosity. So what they're saying is basically, bro, we're not training our stuff off your data. We're just using the models we have to summarize your information for you. Which honestly, like, again, what the fuck with this company? Like, here's the thing. You can believe them at their word, but I don't necessarily believe any of these companies at their word either, okay? There's definitely a benefit for them, in my opinion, that, for them to grab all this information for a purpose behind the scenes is important, right? Like, it's more, I don't just trust them on the fact that they don't train their information, but at least they're being open about this. At least they're saying this publicly for people to record down the road. So what people use it for, right? When they visit Reddit to read your content, it's because they want to read it. And they read more than they would have from a Google search. Reddit changed its mind this week on whether they want Perplexity users to find your public content on their journeys of learning. I love how they make it sound like it's so fucking altruistic. Like, guys, our users only want to learn, okay? Our users only want to learn, okay? What's wrong with learning? Guys, they just want the world to be more educated. In any case, we ain't going to be extorted, and we won't help Reddit extort Google. Even if they're our huge competitor, Perplexity will play fair, but we won't cave. And I actually don't even trust the guys over at Reddit. Again, Reddit wants to make it sound like they give a fuck about the open internet and they give a shit about you, the user, when in reality, you're nothing more than like a money generator for these guys when they can just use your data and sell it to Google anyway. So the thing about all of this is, look, there are no winners. I don't think that this is like one of those situations where like both people are bad. Okay, both sides I don't like. I can just kind of laugh at the situation in of itself. Both sides are trying to be this like morally grandstanding over the other, but in reality, they're both just dipshit tech companies that really at the end of the day care about hyper monetizing the user. I don't really believe Perplexity when they say that their ultimate goal is for people's curiosity to be sort of like tamed because they're so titillated with the thirst of knowledge. And I don't necessarily believe Reddit gives a shit about the open internet, or Reddit even cares about the user privacy and safety. Now, I want to play devil's advocate over here and just kind of try to understand who's more in the right. And I really do think that, I think maybe it might be Perplexity that's in the right, and Reddit kind of is being a little bit of a scumbag here. So if what Perplexity is saying is pretty true, if you actually go to their page, I think what they're saying is if you open up sort of like Perplexity's AI and ask them to summarize this thread, basically it will look at the actual thread over here and it will make a quick summary of, again, what the hell is going on over here, right? Like the actual, so we open up the Perplexity response and here's the actual summarization of it. Now, if what they're saying is true, right? If what Perplexity is saying is true is that they're not just grabbing stuff to train, but they're just scraping the internet and like regurgitating that information through their models, then it's not so different than, for example, if I set up this local LLM, and so for instance, I have web search capabilities that I connected through my own local search engine. If I just send a message, it'll actually start searching the web. So it'll use CRXNG and scrape the internet for, again, the results. So give it a second, it's loading up the model, it'll just search for you. So you can see right over here, it's got some search prompts. It actually searched 3 websites. In fact, those websites were also Reddit in this situation. Again, this is a local AI that I'm using, right? And then it'll produce the actual response for me. And yeah, you can see that like the Comet browser that I was using, which was Perplexity's AI, my own local AI is doing the same thing, albeit obviously slower and probably of lesser quality compared to whatever AI system that they use. So I guess there's not really a training that's going on over here. It's just literally, this is what Perplexity is saying. Like, we're not actually training your AI. We're just like grabbing information from your website and then regurgitating it in this manner. Now, ultimately, at the end, Reddit kind of did expose, to an extent, how these sites kind of operate, even if it's not plainly out in the open, even if they are rejected, right? Like, what Reddit is basically saying is that whenever you go to any website and they have this robots.txt file, which is kind of a explanation to a scraper. Remember, web scraping has existed for a long time, right? Like, this is how Google kind of started out. It scraped links, connected to links, and built the internet search engine that we use today. So again, what Reddit is kind of saying is that, hey, instead of coming to us and paying us to access our users' data, these guys are just going to these third parties and scraping their information. And obviously, according to Perplexity, they're saying that they're not even training models. Again, they're kind of using real-time data searches and scrapes to, feed into existing models, I imagine, and then use those models to give back conversational-esque answers, right? Or just that kind of stuff in general. Again, I don't know how much of that I really believe, but to be real with you, I've noticed that, in just literally the last few days, as this sort of push has evolved, especially when it comes to a lot of these AI tools and their screen recording practices. The other day, and this is a side note, Microsoft's Gaming Copilot had this feature on apparently by default, right? There was a bunch of people testing on ResetEra that the gaming copilot apparently uses model training on text, and that was enabled by default. So basically, it never tells you, like Microsoft wasn't telling you during the installation that the screenshots that it was collecting or gathering from your computer were actually being used to train things. So one user found this out because they were working on an unreleased game while they actually had an NDA agreement. So then when they realized that Copilot was transmitting the text data from the screenshot without asking for permission, since the game was technically under NDA, they might have actually violated it by unknowingly sending information to Microsoft. Now, of course, obviously, I think even if you're not looking at this from an NDA perspective, just training people on users' information is already just a shady sign anyways, right? Gathering all this information and using it is not just a privacy nightmare, but when you go back to things like Perplexity and you look at like how they interact with Reddit, just the cost, the amount of internet bandwidth spent on basically creating slightly better search engines, or I guess the conversational search that people are into, we really have to constantly ask ourselves, is the juice worth the fucking squeeze, right? It's crazy, right? It's crazy to see all these companies are basically at each other's throats. And this lawsuit is one of many lawsuits that are happening between some of the biggest companies in the world. Like you got like fucking Disney going after like Midjourney. You've got Anthropic and fucking Meta apparently pirating the goddamn entirety of human like books and then using it to train their engines and sort of like getting cases, dealt one way or the other. It is an insane minefield to go in. But ultimately, at the end of the day, Reddit did, expose a huge scam. They did expose a pretty bad bank robbery that happened, in their words. And ultimately, they are kind of right, okay? They were right. But I don't think Reddit's an altruistic company. I don't think they give a shit about you. Honestly, from the sidelines watching, it's just looking at two douchebags going at each other. Now, who is the lesser of the douchebags in this situation? I think given Reddit's history, I may have to give it to I may just have to give it to Perplexity. They might be the slightly better company because Reddit is just a goddamn shit minefield to go into. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, the girls are fighting. The girls are fighting. And they're exposing each other. And all we can do is sit back and scream into the void at how unnecessary this shit really is at the end of the day. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike if you dislike it. I am out.